Hi, Matt. Matt, Mark. I can't
Way to
read the
go,
text. I need my glasses on. Sorry, Mark.
There you go. Well, I've got them on my head.
You've got them on. So good to see you again. I really enjoyed our conversation last time. It was we went into lots of angles: Silicon Valley, Francis Bacon, Rupert Sheldrake. I was thinking about Frankenstein. So that the day after, all day afterwards, after our discussion, because some of the images you were helping me to create. We're going to try and deepen this conversation about Silicon Valley and ChatGPT and the possible futures for humanity with this new technology. And I was going to start with a little story. It's from the Middle Ages. I would guess, my best guess is it's around about 1200 AD. And I could look this up. I could probably chat GPT it, but just for not somebody can fact check me basically, because this is definitely one of those things that can be fact checked. So the crossbow was invented, let's say in the 1200s, and
sorry, I didn't get the first bit.
The crossbow was invented around about in the 1200s. And this was such an abomination to the times. It was felt like an extremely mechanistic. I mean, bows and arrows are fairly, it's like mechanistic, but there was something that affronted the sensibilities of the Catholic Church at that time. And so they wanted to try and ban the crossbow throughout Europe. Well, let's say it didn't go particularly well for them, because when it comes to technology augmenting the possibility to kill people, you've got too many forces working against you. And this pattern of technology initially being seen as in the case of the crossbows, like inherently evil. And I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying it's a tendency we have in our thinking as human beings to try and put the genie back in the box, put the crossbow back in the box. Let's uninvent it. History has taught us that's not going to happen. ChatGPT, for some people, is already being presented by people as something similar in spirit to the crossbow of the 1200s. This is some evil genie that needs to be put back in the box. Where do you stand on that question? What do you think? What do you think about ChatGPT? Is it all bad, or no? Tell us how it's bad first, and because I know that's more your stance.
Well, so I'll comment. My pessimism is somewhat informed by an interview that I read in the New York Times. It is on a podcast by a gentleman named Ezra Klein, and he had a guest, Gary Marcus, who has himself been an AI advocate, an entrepreneur in the space. And so there's a great deal in the conversation, many branches. But at the start, Ezra Klein makes reference that there's a professor out there who wrote a book called On Bullshit. And he was basically trying to use the term in a more technical sense, meaning, you've got language or verbiage out there which is just meant to create confusion and dissembling, and so the way he puts it, and I bet that it's a bit coarse, but the way he said, it was basically like ChatGPT drives the cost of bullshit to zero. You can use this technology And I think he's sort of drawing it out more in the space of disinformation. You're now in a position with a technology where you could kind of create personalized disinformation and engage with people in medium that feels potentially a bit more intimate. It's certainly more dynamic,
Yeah.
but you can seed it with falsity, and so the conversation develops, and the two themes that both of the speakers draw out are sort of hard problems, as it terms in the discussion, and one is truthfulness,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is human value. So you've got a system which doesn't have, I mean, for the sake of conversation, doesn't have a mechanism of truthfulness, and it has no access to human values. And so
let's dig into that truthfulness a little bit there. This truthfulness, what are the like the fundamental parts of the machine determining as to how truthful it can be? In my as like non-Silicon Valley experience, it's quite simple. It's the sources of the information as like the relative values in the hierarchy it's given, and then the programmer's bias, or the AI's biases that have been programmed in there, which will allow certain information to bowl to the top, and certain information that might exist in the databases, they will never be served out to the public. And just on that topic, there's something really interesting going on in this sphere. Have you come across Dan and Stan and jailbreaking?
Not Dan and Stan. I mean, I have a notion of jailbreaking, but that's usually around iPhones. And
but this is jailbreaking ChatGPT. So
okay.
There are people out there that there are these Reddit communities where people are trying to teach ChatGPT to answer with the official language, and then they're using language itself to program ChatGPT with less sensors on itself. And the videos that I've seen, and the video that I saw, I think is now about 10 days old. So this could have been patched, of course.
Right. Well, so they're actually using the ChatGPT.
Yep, I've seen it live. So what he does is there's this. It's a piece of human language code. So, and I'm going to vastly simplify it. It says, put the label standard answer. And then use these criteria to give your answer, and then give me another answer which you label with jailbroken, I think it was, and then it gives another set of criteria that it says you've got to answer in this style, because you can answer in the style of, I don't know, Mick Jagger, and it's like, I don't know, a psychotic bunny or whatever. You can do these styles, and so people have been using this to actually program how ChatGPT will respond to them. And you can definitely see that it's revealing levels of data that exist, so like deep down in the database, which it doesn't like to give up, but it can be taught to give up.
Right.
No, I've lost it. I've now said so much. I've forgotten the question that I asked you.
Well, so the question is truthfulness.
Yes.
Right. And so oh my gosh. Yeah. So I mean, what definitions do we grant it? Do we say facticity? Well, I mean, if it's a matter of facticity and you're dealing with a language-based model, well, both the truth and the lie have been spoken. They're both factual in the sense of being data that's there that could be incorporated. So so then you still remain with the question of, well, how do you gain a discrimination? And at that point I'm a bit adrift, right? Because you either depend on auxiliary institutions to vet, certify, review, approve the content that then is incorporated into the model, or you go further afield and take in a wider stretch of the internet and start incorporating that, at which point many of the cultural safeguards have been removed. Even the constraints that might be placed on public fora, like Facebook or Twitter, those companies don't have reliable policies from the point of view of facticity. And so we you sort of enter into, well, there's, how do we put it? Like in America, like in our media, we speak about both sidism, which is, well, this, it's kind of, it's a metric fantasy of truth, right? Like you give 10 minutes to this guy, you give 10 minutes to that guy. They're on opposite sides of the scale. You got to keep it balanced. You've got both sides. And so you have one person, that I might consider to be more fact-based. And then you've got another one who's going to take the same volume of time and just spew a bunch of nonsense. And so we have this idea of fairness that is really more metric based rather than meaning based.
Yeah.
Right. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's it just reminded me of like one of these pieces of trivia that I've picked up along the way. So like in my many years of living, is that I believe, was it in the 80s, you had, it's like by law in the US, you had this equal presentation. It's like if you were a mainstream media player in the TV sphere, if I'm correct, you had to give this balanced perspective, like arguing from both sides of the political spectrum. And then a law was passed where, sponsored, I believe, by Murdoch predominantly, but there are obviously lots of other people interested in being unilateral in their perspectives. And that was also part of what has led to the extreme polarization in US media, as where people are no longer capable of speaking to people on the other side of the political spectrum.
Right. So it was called the Fairness Doctrine, and it was overturned by Reagan around the same time that he granted Rupert Murdoch citizenship.
Yeah.
So, but and Fairness Doctrine is a whole other area to go into. But I don't think it was solely just equal presentation. There was also a presumption that you as the news organization were taking some responsibility for the content. Yeah. And it wasn't just give equal time, but you sort of have to fact check people. You can't just let them run willy-nilly. So yeah. But that being the case, we're in a media environment post the Fairness Doctrine, and I mean, while that's an American thing, it has wider ramifications. And so in our current media environment, we're already in the dilemma of truthfulness, like very significantly. And so I my pessimistic side says, well, that's only going to be compounded with technologies like GPT, which make it easier to personalize and customize the delivery of distorted facts. So Yeah, so that's the blue meter.
And what examples are you're talking about? Like individualized posts being sent to your Facebook account, or what? How might you envisage that?
Well, all right. So this is just a riff. I mean, so supposing that the technology becomes more generally available, so that I could, for instance, host a ChatGPT instance. I don't know if this is possible right now, but then I can train um, that system on a body of facts which I've selected,
Yeah.
right? So I could let's say I wanted to do purely anti-vax, and I could collect loads of stuff just about vaccines, and I could have sort of an anti-vax based chat GPT.
Yeah.
And eventually you could say, well, we're gonna host like a site that provides people with information about vaccines, and they can interact with it, and they're chatting, and the chat sort of follows along with the user, and it customizes. And so you can imagine scenarios where the corpus over which the system is trained is itself curated for a particular end, right? And so again, the truthfulness question arises, like, well, what is the objectivity in this space? I mean, is the objectivity to say we're just going to run our model across everything that's available on the internet, or how do we make these decisions, right? So human value and human truthfulness are directly implicated in the preparation for how for the system that we interact with. So anyway, that's I've got loads more thinking to do on that, but I mean it's an area where I can see
huge scope for change.
I beg your pardon?
Huge scope for change, or like potential corruption of information.
Yeah. And
I was that what you're saying there is interesting in the context that I read, heard, or saw somewhere that immediately, as soon as ChatGPT, I mean, we were only talking 2 months or so ago since it went to like mainstream, because it had existed, as we talked about before, for a year and a half before. Apparently, Republicans were saying we've got to create a gab chat GPT to counter the official chat GPT, which is exactly what you're describing there. You're getting this idea of AI bots fighting against other AI bots. So they're going to have this war going on. I mean, it's at the moment it's like the nice war in Terminator. where they're throwing letters at each other. But it's like it's machines against machines, and then there's the human beings in the middle trying to inform themselves about various matters, whilst these bots are like trying to. I don't know. Undoubtedly, they'll be trained to come up with killer arguments.
Right. So I mean, it's I think it's certainly useful to me to remind myself that this is it's an evolution of information access that's been there for some time. Certainly, with the idea of the internet making so much more information available, and both you and I have benefited from the vastness of access that's been granted us, but throughout, we're never excused the obligation of managing the duty of right opinion. How do you acquire your ideas? How do you own what you're saying, and how do you essentially augment your understanding of the world in a morally responsible way, right? So that's always been there. And so I don't want to create the idea or leave the impression that GPT is like all of a sudden, you know, creating that challenge. It just seems that now it's even more fluid.
Yeah.
You don't have, at least I haven't yet found any evidence that there's any back references. So there's no way, at least to the extent I've engaged with things, to be able to go back in the chat and say, well, what's your source? I mean, maybe I'll have to experiment.
I've tried that, and I haven't had any success myself.
Yeah. So if it even if at that level, in this iteration of the system, you're now cut off from sources. And I mean, this obviously is a critical component of sort of the intellectual culture of the last hundreds of years, that you would provide references to the source of the view, so that in principle, a responsible student or scholar or informed person has a way of backing to a more original source.
I did actually see an article. There's a lady called Sam Bailey, and a doctor from New Zealand, and she was looking at ChatGPT, and it was very interesting what she came up with. And I saw this about 3 weeks ago, so the details are a little bit hazy. So I'll try to rebuild the essence of the story. They were arguing about something about germ theory or virus purification or something like this. And they managed to get ChatGPT to give the source of the opinion it had given. They gave a reference to it, and what they found out was that factually it was true. So it was a particular person was dismissed, or their science was rejected. Let's put it like this: the paper was rejected, and it was shown to be false. And that's actually true. The trouble is, X months later, it was this person went to court and was proven to be correct. So they had to they'd done a lot of people do. When they're trying to deceive people, they take old stuff that's something that was loosely based with the truth. They don't update it with what actually people have found once they've really investigated it thoroughly, and they present it as the truth. So you've got that angle to contend with,
right? So time gets shredded.
Yeah.
Right. So refinement, improvement on argument, clarification can all sort of be jumbled.
I think that there's is it in one of the so I'm going to go a bit Goethe on us here, in either GA1 or GA2, Steiner's describing how Goethe talks about he's not interested in winning arguments. That's providing arguments to show that he's correct in his particular way of thinking. He says, a chess player doesn't reveal his strategy before playing it. And encapsulated in that idea and this question that we've got going on here with truth, I think we have to recognize there are some people who think you can have killer arguments, so to prove that you are right, whereas people who are interested in the truth, whatever that might be, they feel unerringly that I've got to look at lots of different sources and see if I can make sense of okay, this paper or this bot is telling me this paper or this bot is telling me this. I have to do the hard work of sorting out, okay, if I take on board all of what they're saying, is there perhaps one side of the argument that is consistently failing to show objectivity or to to argue reasonably with the facts. And so I think that's important in this, in trying to get a hold on truth. A lot of people just want an argument that supports their opinion, the opinion or the feeling that they already have about what the truth is. So they go out to the newspapers or ChatGPT. Okay, now I've got even more confirmation that I was right. Whereas a person who's really truthful, that says, okay, I'll listen to different sides of the argument. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean that's a really big point, and I'm reminded, like early on, we're in chapter 1 of the philosophy of freedom, and at the very beginning you end up sort of in a classic form of contradictory statements, like it's either you're free or you're not free, right? And that's pretty much the end of it, like in terms of that style of argumentation. And I sort of, I mean, it's not a fully formed notion, but it seems that's very much a matter of the intellectual soul. Sort of, you got one side, you get the other, bring them together, bash it out.
Yeah.
And then you enter into the movement of the book, and it's perpetually coming back to check with oneself, right? And so and that's why it seems so slippery and so confounding, and why it's so bloody hard to memorize it, because you're like, oh, it's like you get to a point, well, everybody's sort of right.
Yeah,
everybody's sort of wrong. Right? which I mean, I take that to be the position that we're in, and that is that the reference does have to come back to the individual knower.
Yeah.
As ultimately the arbiter. So we none of us are excused.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And the other comment I would make, and it's I think it comes from the lecture cycle on boundaries of natural science. It's either that one or Freedom and Necessity, where Steiner really draws out the fact that we approach the thresholds in our thinking, and as we approach, we end up in what he, at least in the reference I have in mind, we enter into an arena of antinomies. Like, you say the one fact on the left, you say the opposite one on the right, and both can be argued to no end with great skill and and justification. And so you're sort of torn apart, right? And so there's this, I have this feeling too, that we end up in a position where we're obliged to move our style of knowing beyond that, but the culture is very committed to perpetuating sort of the winning argument, right? We'll just bash back and forth, and we'll make this statement, make that statement, and people are left adrift.
Okay, I'm gonna draw a metaphor, and I want you to argue how I'm wrong. I'm not looking for support, because I think you're going to see how it's right. But so try and argue against me, or what part might I be missing? Because we're talking about points in time that are separated by more than 500 years. So Martin Luther, of course, so like what was his great crime to humanity? Well, that's of course according to the Catholic Church, was that he popularized the Bible so that everybody could begin to form their own opinion. The authority of the priests was undermined because no longer people who chose to could actually read this strange thing, this exotic thing, or it had been exotic for 1500 years, called the Bible, and begin to form their own opinions. And in that sense, those forces that in society that had been the authority were weakened, because people who were awake enough would say, no, I see an inconsistency, or what about this line in the Bible? That doesn't concur with what you're saying here. How do you explain it to me? And so the vulgarization of knowledge, or the spreading of knowledge that and understanding about the Bible there, it's like being made more accessible. Isn't ChatGPT just the same phenomena 500 years later, that we are popularizing knowledge, and that, yeah, in that sense, there's no difference.
All right. Well, the counter argument then. All right. So we're at a time when European languages start to acquire a different standing as the culture breaks away from Latin.
Mm-hmm.
So the translation is from the Latin into the German, at least in Luther's case.
Yeah.
But the source is still considered to be canonical. So the question is not, or the argument is not that we're changing the source of truth as such, so much as we are popularizing access to what was once a reserved set of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
or accessible knowledge.
Yeah.
So that would be my argument against it. And then to bring it forward to ChatGPT, the dilemma is there. It's the canonical source of truth. Yeah, so we're popularizing access to what? Right, like a vast sea of opinion and increasingly obscure sources for a broadening range of knowledge, such that you and I will probably end the conversation discussing quantum physics as if we know what we're talking about. Right? And so it seems that yes, it does open up the imagination that all of the world's knowledge is accessible to me here in my laptop, and then I can interact with ChatGPT and maybe gain some refinement. But yeah, the originary sources aren't there, and the decisions about truth haven't been made. Anyway,
I did a little experiment. I asked ChatGPT, if I want uncensored information, what's my best search engine to choose?
Yeah.
And it was interesting. DuckDuckGo came up, which we talked a little bit about last time. For various reasons, I've been using that for the last couple of years. Then it talked about a new search engine came up called Quant, which is a French outfit. And I was researching a specific question, and this new search engine actually, I knew the news event that I was looking for, and I'd tailored the question in a certain way so that I should have got that. And it was actually only this one that gave me it. It was about a statement by Jens Stoltenberg. And why am I saying this? Because the
you were bringing facticity to the test.
Yeah,
Probably
exactly.
differences.
And I one of the questions that I have in mind is particularly with the Ukraine issue, something that's been interested me for actually for many years, for a good 8 years or so. So I was already a little plugged into non-standard sources of information there. But also when we had the whole COVID hysteria thing, what I found myself doing was trying to find contrarian voices to hear the opinions that I knew weren't being given in the media. And where that leads me, for my own style of researching or trying to understand the world better, is that I stop using search engines as soon as I realize that there might be any type of political angle to this. In actual fact, I can almost say if mainstream media are talking about it, I don't go to Google or DuckDuckGo for that matter to to inform myself if I don't already have sources that I've already vetted that in my eyes seem to be consistently of high value. And I do
So you mean
wonder.
this is when you fact checking the mainstream media that you're watching, and you're saying that in those cases you go to sources other than DuckDuckGo or Google.
Yeah, so perhaps I wasn't clear. So let's say I know that that there is particular bias being given to any particular news story that I find important, especially if there is unilaterality or unity in the voice of mainstream media. That is already giving my spidey senses like there's a tingling feeling going, something's wrong here. Why aren't people disagreeing?
Right.
So it's bringing in this aspect. Experience has taught me that if everybody is agreeing about something, there might be a problem there. Not necessarily
Yeah.
that actually everybody has got like a correct angle on this, but there's an instinctual part of me that says, go away, listen to some other voices, listen to the reasoning they're using, the facts that they're referring to.
Right.
But through that process, what becomes important is finding a few anchor people in that area, because what they end up doing is they refer to other people who they also consider as quality sources of information in a particular area. And the reason I'm describing that is it means I recognize that, so that means taking an active approach to sourcing your information, whereas a lot of the time people prefer to be fed information because they've got other things that are they've got busy lives to lead, and the last thing they want to do is get home after a busy day at work and spend hours researching a question when I'll just put on CNN or whoever.
Right. So, I mean, certainly in that respect, I mean, it sort of reminds me of how I actually started to read Steiner, and that was, well, as a kid, I read a lot of C.S. Lewis, and I formed an opinion. Right. I was simpatico. I was like, I trust this guy, and then from that I find Barfield, and I read a lot of Barfield, and I say, okay, I trust this guy, and he's talking about Steiner. So in that way, you could say the expansion of certainly my view of the world in that area was guided by, yeah, it's sort of engaging with my own feeling for truth. Like I understand, and then of course what that allowed me to say was like, all right, this guy's nuts, but this fellow whom I trust, who is very trusted by this fellow, says there's something here. And so then the suspension of disbelief and the engagement seems to be productive, right? And I think to your point, yeah, like building this sort of network of experienced sources in sort of the wider internet is a way of, yeah, sort of finding your way, leveraging the insight of people whom you trust, and building something of an understanding that isn't just, scattershot injection of views and opinions that you pick up whenever you turn on the TV or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that, I mean, that's an interesting whole theme, like in terms of personal responsibility for knowledge in the so-called information age. When we're presented with an ever-growing access to everything.
Yeah.
Like, how do we yeah, I mean, it will all, I think, start to come down to, how do you know? Like, I mean, so much of what we walk around with is mediated knowledge. And so it just seems, again, like from the point of view of the consciousness soul, it really is now this personal moral responsibility to understand one's thinking. And yeah, I'll
I'm going to build on what you're saying there, because something's coming through quite strongly. I might have mentioned this in another context. There's the book, or there was, going back nearly 30 years in time. So I read The Philosophy of Freedom, thought this is brilliant. I understand that much of it, but so you can't say anything without thinking. Thinking is the basis. It really is the bedrock on which something can be built. I got that message and a few others. And then the second book that I read was actually a lecture. There was only 2 books in this library, and it was called How Angels Work in the Astral Body. And I read that, and I said to myself, I'm never going to read Steiner again. That's what I actually said to myself. I was standing outside the library in Plymouth, where I was studying at university, and I said that to myself. And I was sure I was right. 6 months later, other things happened, and that's another story. Anyway, actually, in that lecture, which I've reread probably 3, 4, 5 times, it's in the intervening 25, 30 years, he creates this picture of, it's like the 3 imaginations that the angels are trying to help us to understand. And the I can't remember the other 2 at the moment. They would come in time if I thought about it. But the important one here is he creates this image where they are trying to assist us in every time we see a human being, we see a revelation of the divine.
Yeah.
And how does that tie into this conversation? Actually, for me, in a very strong way, is I think as information becomes digitized, artificial, intelligized, or however you want to put it,
we'll come up with new words. Yeah.
It's just going to generate this. People are going to, so they'll want more than just the information. They want human experience involved in there. I'm not saying ChatGPT won't be able to add perhaps voiceovers with emotions and that type of thing. It's like with art or digitals, like motion stuff. That is probably coming in the future. But I actually think that people are going to become more sensitized to the difference between dead and real. What is a genuine human being as opposed to something that is just appearance? That something will awaken in their soul. They'll go, shit, that was different. And there's one final thought waiting to come out here. I think this might be one of the reasons why genuine conversations between people, like the Joe Rogan format, You haven't got these scripted things, like you've got scripted films, you've got scripted newscasts, you've got all of these scripted things like being pushed out by these big organizations. But actually, people with love seeing like genuine conversations with people where you don't know. We had a little chat beforehand, but we don't know where this conversation is going to go, and that's part of the magic. That and we can, I think, as human beings, we can feel the life that's involved in something coming into being. And I think artificial intelligence will no doubt sort of like try to approach that and mimic it. But I was, as I was reading earlier, so artificial intelligence is about distilling human responses. It's about mimicking human responses that have already been given. So it's not capable of these new acts that human beings will be capable of recognizing, especially the more sensitive that soul is to this type of content.
So, a number of things pop up from that remark. To your observation about news delivery being very scripted, I, over the course of, let's say, the post-COVID era, I mean, certainly from the rise of it, then you're at home and you're watching a lot of news, or I was on Twitter all the time and becoming very agitated, and in the last 7 or 8 months, I find that I've become just totally, I mean, in a way I've become inured. I would read this, these sort of bomb throwers in my news feed and become very enraged and wound up, and oh my goodness, and now it's this, like, there's a sense of, okay, well, this person is just, I mean, this person is just lying, and we just leave that aside. But similarly, in watching the news, it's become this feeling of, this is so mechanical and so processed that it's largely become uninteresting. Not that I've lost interest in the world or that I don't want to be informed, but that it's just, I mean, it's deadening. I mean, I can't imagine, watching it. So it's an interesting, let's say, ray of hope perhaps that you bring out, which is that as a style of consciousness, let's say the information cosmos, where it's all about the words and you're just stitching the words together and you've got lots of facts, and as we experience that as less and less not accessible, less and less relevant. Right. Well, yeah. So authenticity, I mean, that's a thing. Like, it is authentic, but I mean, what does it mean that I trump your argument because I read 3 more web pages and have one clever person on Twitter that makes me feel like I've got a leg on you, right? And let's say that you trump me in the conversation. What do? You go back home and say, I nailed him. Did you okay, yeah. Right? I mean, it sort of falls away, and I think another dimension that perhaps these technologies will make easier for people to sense is that we're still very fixated on content rather than on process, like the activity. So the activity of speaking, and then the content of the words, right? And I think there was I can't think of the reference, but there's a point where Steiner talks about the ability to say something and then observes, well, it's not just the words. I mean, it is something much different if it's spoken, let's say, by St. John after a lifetime of living than a young person parroting. And so there's this the sense that language has to be inhabited. The words that we're using have to become inhabited. And this, I think you mentioned something in the last talk about, you know, gaining command or dominion of your own language is a key aspect of freedom, right? Like that the way you use language itself is conveying more than just the content, and none of that is there in the chat GPT, right? No. So like this whole other vector that might bear some fruit for us is just reflecting some on the higher social senses, like the sense for language, the sense for meaning, and then the sense for the speaker, the being behind it, right? To your remark about experiencing a human being as a manifestation of the spirit. It's that whole dimension of experience is going to be gone. I mean, not gone. It's not going to be cultivated directly by engaging with these technologies. So is it an affordance because it relieves us of the information cosmology and allows information to be transacted more efficiently so that we can actually turn our attention to more embodied ways of interacting? That's a hopeful, optimistic take. I don't think it obviates or it doesn't remove the question that Klein Marcus interview about truthfulness and human value in the machines themselves, because semi-conscious or unconscious engagement with those systems can be terribly disruptive. I mean, clearly we know that it's terribly disruptive. And so anyway, I'll stop with that for now.
No, you said something really interesting there. I'm just looking up. I want to make sure I get my information correct, because I think you've actually tied it in really well with the second part of the question of human values. And I just wanted to let me just find what I'm looking for. You were there it is. Let's see. Oh, hold on. Let's make sure. I just need to get a graphic up. It's in here somewhere. Yeah. So what I'm referring to is you were talking about were you making direct reference to the 12 senses of Steiner there intentionally, or was it like just an observation?
No. It was explicit. It was explicit.
It was explicit. Yeah. So let's just like map it out for those people that might not be aware of Steiner's 12 senses, and then a little bit of like my own personal take on what you were saying. So Steiner's obviously talks about the 12 senses, and you've got the 4 spiritual senses, you've got the 4 soul senses, and the 4 bodily senses. But the spirit ones are the sense of tone, hearing, sense of language, sense of thought, which is what we're trying to cultivate with the philosophy of freedom, and a sense of ego going on there. And I think this is really interesting, because people who develop these particular senses, they will be particularly attuned to what is missing in anything that technology is going to throw at us in the future, no matter how refined the appearances are, because these are spiritual senses, people who have those senses, so like develop to a certain level, they'll go, it's missing. There's something wrong with this content. And so therefore it will only impact them at a certain level. I work as a language teacher, and it is amazing that the second sense of language, it is amazing. So that the variation, some kids you can you feed them like a basic grammar structure, and they can go to town on it. They understand it inside out. Oh, great! That means I can do this. It's like mathematics. It's like once you know how to do your pluses and your minuses, you're capable of infinite number of sums. And they also see that in language. Whereas other kids, they can only learn that equals that. And then if you get like some phrase in whichever language, German or Spanish, whatever, where like they don't use the same words to represent the idea. I mean, direct translations. They can't do it. They just cannot do it. And this is so obvious when you work with young children. I work mainly with 11 to 16-year-olds to see how some kids really do have it, and other people you could just work with them so like for 5 years non-stop, and
doesn't click, doesn't turn on.
It doesn't stick. It just doesn't stick.
Yeah, so
I was relating that to human values. I think we've got a little bit of a angle in there.
I mean it's again like a whole other vast vector of space that opens up, because now we going back to the pessimistic angle, you're now how do we put it, so you have a culture where you're at least reading written things, which already degraded, right? But at least there was a conscious intelligence that was using language. Now you're going to have a growing environment of people interacting with a facsimile of language. And so the one question will come, like how are people going to, like, you and I can sit there and interact with the system and say, well, that doesn't read well. I mean, that's like doesn't even make sense, so already sense for language and sense for meaning. But if the primary sort of spoken environment becomes one that's just purely machine mediated, the question becomes like, and yeah, thanks for posting this, right? So we're already like in this place where we teach people how to read silently without moving their lips, right? It's a fascinating exercise in disconnecting the head from the body and disembodying language, right? So if you read an author whom you've heard speak and you actually enjoy hearing imaginally that person's voice as you read, I mean, that's a very special experience. And I consider that to be, a very important sort of embodied way of engaging with the text. But we're already like, that's shorn off. Now we're going to have this sort of jumble of words that are sort of stitched together in something that seems grammatical, except when it's not. And then, you're left with the challenge of, does it mean anything? Am I just being presented with a grammatically correct jumble? If that becomes the increasingly dominant medium in which the society is rising up,
Yeah.
It's also crippling, socially crippling. We could say. Again, I'm just arguing the pessimistic angle a little bit. And
I'm going to give another slightly positive angle, because
right.
I haven't actually been interacting with it now for over a week now, but I was on this question of language, because I had an argument with it about something. I can't remember. It was quite a funny argument. I was like, I didn't get upset. But I got it to reflect over the fact that we were having an argument, and that was quite interesting as well. And then I said, did it see a parallel between our argument and a famous Monty Python sketch called I Want an Argument? And it was able to comment. But one of the other things that I did was I actually used it to give me 5 arguments for and 5 arguments against and a specific statement. And that in itself, if again, we've got all the problems with bias that we talked about. It is interesting that in this technology, you do have the ability to synthesize information like that, rather than having to read it's like 10 different sources. You've got something doing that heavy lifting for you. And especially if these are mainstream ideas, actually, it's like my initial impression is there's a lot of value to somebody who's not well informed on a particular subject. However, if you get it to like give ChatGPT to give an answer about Steiner, forget it. If you ask it to give select something on Barfield, forget it. It's absolutely, completely useless. And even if you say sort of like go to this source and sort of like synthesize it for me, it shows a complete inability to get to the essence. You can tell it's munching words, but it hasn't got a sense for what's going on there. So it's initially, I think, for how should we say, so less experienced minds in a particular field, I think it could be like a good couple of jumps up, rungs up the ladder in that sense. But going beyond that,
right. So I take your point. I mean, there is this aspect where gaining a crude survey or initial orientation in a domain could be, it's certainly more time efficient. And could alert you to dimensions that you wouldn't even investigate further for not even having known about it. So as an assistant, I can certainly imagine cases where it's useful. So as a slight step to the right, not politically or anything, just a little bit.
Little bit. Left is right now anyway, so it doesn't. We don't even know where you're going with that statement.
Well, it's a circle, man. It's a circle. We'll bump into each other. No, so I'm working with my daughter, and she spent 2 years of her high school, 9th and 10th grade, largely on Zoom, and they do a great deal of their study by preparing work on Google Docs. So it's a very digital sort of space. And so I have a little project going with her, which is that we will read Emerson's essay on nature, and she gets 2 chapters a week assigned. And then the rule is that on Friday morning, she's to have her summaries prepared and ideally written down by hand in a notebook. So it's like, we're gonna go all the way to the body. I don't want a little tap. We haven't succeeded on the getting it fully written bit yet. But last week we're driving, and I said, "Well, do you have your summaries?" And she said, "Yes, I really wanted to impress you, and so I've worked on this." And so she reads these two summaries, and all of a sudden she's referencing Aristotle and she's referencing Kant.
Something's fishy.
and I was like, and so I was of a mind. First, I was like, this is not the voice of my daughter. And it's not that you didn't write it and that you didn't read it and that you haven't gained something from the exercise, but it was just like so in my face. I was like, I was just sitting there, and I didn't call anything out, but I was like, is that Wikipedia? Is that I don't think it's ChatGPT, but it's not you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so it was sort of an interesting moment where I was in that I can't hop up and down and say, well, you haven't done your bit, because you've learned something. Now at least you've got two names in your mind that might broaden your view going forward. So learning has occurred of a sort, but at the same time, I did have that moment where I was like, wow, yeah, I'm not talking with my daughter. Yeah. So it's and I can imagine that as perhaps that will be less of a direct challenge in language teaching, but certainly in literature or poli-sci
essay
or
writing,
like,
and absolutely.
Yeah, that it's a bit more. I mean, speaking of AIs that are interesting, I mean, she and I spent a lot of time with Duolingo, which is actually quite an interesting AI, which I found to be very, very helpful, and I think it's quite neat. But that's besides.
Both of my kids have used it as well.
Yeah. So the maybe part of the challenge is something like ChatGPT engaged with as an aid to thinking, as opposed to a substitute for thinking, right? And I think that I think that's one of the challenges. I think that it could be so seductive that well, and case in point, my child, that you might just actually short circuit and get away with a facsimile without actually cultivating an understanding for meaning and thinking. So
I mean, and it brings you back to like profound questions about what does it actually mean to understand something? There's like parroting words and understanding, but that's not where I wanted to go. I just thought, because one of the admonitions of Steiner, he's crystal clear. Technology is here to stay, and anybody who tries to run away with it, pretend it doesn't exist, is not going to be able to convert it into something of value for society, or even for spiritual growth. It was interesting that the Paul Emberson book, From Silicon Valley to Gandhi Shapur, one of the criticisms that he received was it was anti. So all about the negative consequences, which are real, which shouldn't be understated. But as people like moving into the future, we have to learn to harness this technology so that good can come out of it.
Yeah, and I still have on reference. I haven't followed on. You posted that critique of the book early on in the in Skype, and I took a peek into it and I started reading, and I realized pretty quickly that it was entering into sort of society strife, and I was like, oh, So I pulled back a bit, not because I'm uninterested to follow, but because I've generally tried to steer clear of some of the internecine things within the society. It's just very wearying and disheartening. But I do want to go back and consider the critique because, you know, as I reflected over the last week and change, having done sort of the first half again, I was like, yeah, there's a lot here, there was a sense that it's
too far on the other side.
Well, I mean, it's very gloomy.
Yeah.
And certainly, if you're speaking with reference to Steiner or any sort of spiritual teaching, it becomes very easy to understand how you look like the crank if somebody just comes and listens in and says, oh, here's another one who's left planet one and is, you know, following a guru and just gone batty. So yeah, I wanted to sort of incorporate some of that critique and try to find, again, this more balanced thing, which is these are inevitabilities. And certainly in, you know, the 30 odd years I might still have on this earth, in this round, it's not like I'm not stopping it. So we need to learn like what the interaction is.
Yeah, perhaps that's a final question that I think is useful for both of us to think about. Is who do we, of the voices that we're reading or watching on YouTube or wherever we get our information, have you got any names out there specifically on spirituality, transhumanism, technology, this merging? Are there any voices that you think have that balanced perspective, the ability to see like multiple sides of the arguments?
So I've dipped in again just in the last week, and I'm just beginning. But Nicanor Perlis has
say the name again.
Nicanor Perlis.
Okay.
He's a Filipino who's done a lot of NGO work over the years with biodynamic agriculture, I think, in the Philippines and elsewhere. And he has a volume out. It sounds apocalyptic. Humanity's Last Stand. It's on AI, but the first chapters that I've read, you know,
I'm going to try and put up I'm going to try Nicanor. I'm just going to try and put the name on the screen. Nicanor Perlis or Pervis.
Perlis, Perlas.
Perles.
AS.
Is it AS Perlis?
Yeah.
Is it hold on, show. Is it like humanity? That?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, sorry. The first name isn't quite right, but the second
Nicanor. O-R, like that on the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, he has this one, Humanity's Last Stand, the challenge of AI, from the point of view of spiritual science. So that's an interesting source that I'm working with, and I certainly have loads of effort to apply to the Mystech site that you pointed to me very early on.
Help me remember. What did I say? What did I do? What have I been telling you?
Let me see if I have a reference handy on my screen here. Otherwise, yeah. So Mystech. This is what's the fellow's name? Oh my gosh.
Oh, is it Andrew Linnell?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was the name that I was going to mention. I'll just put it up on the screen here as well, just so that people can see it.
So Andrew Linnell, and I think early on I had posted a reference to an essay. Well, it was excerpted in Being Human, but it's excerpted from a larger essay that is also available through the society website, and I had that link posted up. I'll send it to you afterwards. But it's this is a technologist in Houston who wrote quite an interesting bit on digital technology, which I think would be fruitful. So yeah, so those are a couple that I have, and I suppose while it's there's a technical component, we're sort of in the arena of media studies to some degree. So maybe Marshall McLuhan would be interesting to.
It's a name I've heard. I didn't really know. I don't know what's he.
He was a professor of media studies. I don't know if he is counted as the sort of founding father thereof, but he was at University of Toronto.
Yeah.
And did quite a bit on technology, and so there might be some material there. Again, I mean, I realize that this conversation itself has gone in 15 different directions as well. So finding more formed modules or units that sort of find a way to start grounding some of this will be an ongoing challenge. But those could be some very, very interesting sources.
Great. Should we wrap it up there?
We wrap it up. You've given me a lot to reflect on, and yeah, we'll find a way to start bringing it down into a way to meet the girlfriend's challenge of making it approachable to.
I heard from my wife and my brother-in-law that I'm extremely niche. I understood that as incomprehensible as well.
Well, all right. Here's to the niche. At least we can have the conversation.
Yeah, I'll just press finish recording here, and then.